I'm concerned that policeman is following us.
We've got nothing to worry about. I rigged the AI jammers. He'll never find G1.
Oh man, his lights just came on and he's getting out.
Good evening. My AI scanner detected an unregistered AI. Do you have a license for the AI in this truck?
Hello, officer. Our truck's AI has been having some issues. We just got it back from the shop.
My partner is detecting a second AI signal. Are you smuggling unlicensed AI tech from China into the U.S.?
G1, activate self-preservation mode and flee this unlawful police detention.
Oh man, we have a run. Call for backup.
From the methadone center, 175 Second Avenue. 175 Second Avenue.
Hey there, it's Ron Gula from Gula Tech Adventures, and in this week's video from our virtual podcast studio, we are going to discuss AI regulation. Now, I see regulation happening for a lot of different organizations that use artificial intelligence applications in three major areas. First of all, we're going to talk about how AI usage can get banned. Second, we're going to talk about how AI usage can be made more transparent. And third, we're going to talk about actually something I think is going to be the most influential part of this discussion is protecting the copyright and the trademarks of the data being used to train the AIs. All right. Now, first of all, let's talk about banning things. So far, my biggest thought on banning technology is that what the U.S. government bans, what gets passed into a law for general citizen, what happens at corporations, it's all independent. And a lot of times when I talk to people in the general public and they hear about things like, oh, the U.S. government banned DJI drones, so I don't know why I can't buy one at Best Buy. It's because people are not understanding the different jurisdictions that are out there. The federal government, the White House, they're free to make whatever policies they want through executive orders that people can use technologies. They can't use technology. So currently today, when we're recording this in 2024, the DoD has banned the use of DJI drones because of their connections to China. They've also banned the use of Huawei routers and cell phones and things like that from China. But if you look at something like TikTok is much more of a nationwide United States discussion that we're having, where people can maybe ban the usage of it at corporations. You can even choose not to use TikTok. I'm not a TikTok user, but for the most part, TikTok is not illegal in this country. It is a U.S. corporation that is 100% owned by a Chinese national bank, and there's some concerns there that the data collected in the U.S. could be sent back to China. So what does this have to do with artificial intelligence? Well, it's another form of technology. If an app is using AI and it's sending data back to Russia or China, it doesn't matter if it's a social media app, it's a malware detection app, that data going back could be the reason why this app gets banned. Now, another reason an AI app could get banned is because of a lack of transparency. We'll talk about that in a second. But if we do not know what the algorithms and data used to train that large language model or the AI application, it could be something that we deem we don't want to enter into our financial system, into our public companies, or even into our personal lives. Now, banning things isn't just a form of something that the federal government does or nationwide does. We've seen a lot of different people ban things, such as schools preventing students from using ChatGPT. And I think those kind of bans are going to be knee-jerk reactions, and people are going to realize pretty quickly that these tools are great multipliers of personal productivity, if you will. And that, schools are going to shift from banning, using things like ChatGPT and Claude to really embracing it and helping people use them to be better in general. But are we going to have more things banned? Yes. Is it going to be some knee-jerk political reactions? Potentially. I think what's going to happen more, though, is there's going to be more of a focus on transparency, which is what I'm going to talk about next. So when we talk about things being transparent, there's a couple different things in motion already with software in general that is going to have a dramatic impact on artificial intelligence usage. First of all, we want to know where something was made. Is it vulnerable where it's hosted? There's already been a lot of progress in this administration that we want to have security labels for IoT devices, for mobile apps, for mobile phones, for pretty much everything that's out there. And I've done some videos on this channel before, and I think this is going to impact the AI usage much, much, much further. Not only are we going to want to know if this app that uses AI is secure, But we're also going to want to know, where does it send its data? Where was it made from? Have other people reviewed this, right? And this information needs to be shared. Now, what's new is that there's so many different kinds of AIs out there, and unless you're keeping up with it on an almost daily basis, you really don't know how good your AI is compared to other AIs. Now, the cloud AIs that everybody uses through a chat interface, ChatGPT from OpenAI, Claude, Bard, all these different things, even the one from X, they're all getting better all the time, but none of them have a sustaining model. If you've ever read the news that OpenAI is, multiple, billion, $20 billion type company, but it's actually losing money, right? So long term, we are going to be moving AI to the edge. So it's going to be even more important that your AI at the edge has some sort of license or modeling where you understand how smart it is. And this could be sort of like an IQ for your AI, and it might even be an EQ for your AI, right? Your models that work on-prem, which is the only way we can really scale this stuff, we really need to have classifications for that. Now, there's a lot of different people doing research on what does having an IQ or an EQ for an AI really, really mean. But as the AIs kind of seamlessly go from in the cloud to on-prem, this is going to be more important for people to understand those kind of things. Then lastly, we already kind of talked about, making things more transparent about how it was trained, what data it was trained on, what it's doing with the data. That's all being done with those security labels. You mix that with the on-prem stuff, and now you've got the ability to actually understand what these AIs are doing with our data. And I can only say the need for this is going to become more transparent, because as we move away from basically the chat interfaces and the API interfaces to physical things. When your AI is integrated in your car at a level better than, CarPlay or talking to Alexa or talking to Siri, then it's going to get interesting, because we're going to personify that. And once we personify that, the demand from the public to have more transparency and accountability for the AI stuff, just wait till they're robots, right? When we have robots that are walking around and talking to us, the general public and the politicians are going to be demanding this kind of stuff. Now, having said both about banning things and transparency, making things more transparent, I think what's going to get even more interesting is how we protect how these AIs are being made. So there's been a lot of news over the last couple of years about the New York Times versus OpenAI lawsuit, which basically says, look, OpenAI trained its AI on data from the New York Times. And the New York Times basically said, this is not acceptable. So what I really think is going to happen, if you look at all the different types of data that's out there, you've got Getty Images, you've got Creative Commons type of data and works out there, which data can be used to train which AIs is very interesting. And I think what's going to happen is we're going to kind of go back to the 1980s and 1990s when we had digital rights management and we had streaming and we had all these kind of different copyright vehicles where we understand the data that's being used and how it's being consumed. Well, what would that look like in 2030? And I was reminded of a short story by Richard Stallman. Now, Richard Stallman is an open source luminary, right? He's very, very much about the GNU movement, the GNU movement. And he published this short story called The Right to Read. And in this story, it talks about a wide variety of like historical history, fictional history, where somebody in 2096 is talking about this revolution where there was too much digital rights management to just even read a book. And because of this, I thought it was really interesting to turn this into a short animated film. Here it is.
For Dan Halbert, the road to Tycho began in college, when Lissa Lentz asked to borrow his computer. Hers had broken down, and unless she could borrow another, she would fail her midterm project. There was no one she dared ask except Dan. This put Dan in a dilemma. He had to help her, but if he lent her his computer, she might read his books. Aside from the fact that you could go to prison for many years for letting someone else read your books, the very idea shocked him at first. Like everyone, he had been taught since elementary school that sharing books was nasty and wrong, something that only pirates would do. And there wasn't much chance that the SPA, the Software Protection Authority, would fail to catch him. In his software class, Dan had learned that each book had a copyright monitor that reported when and where it was read, and by whom, to central licensing. They used this information to catch reading pirates, but also to sell personal interest profiles to retailers. The next time his computer was networked, central licensing would find out. He, as computer owner, would receive the harshest punishment for not taking pains to prevent the crime. Of course, Lissa did not necessarily intend to read his books. She might want the computer only to write her midterm. But Dan knew she came from a middle-class family and could hardly afford the tuition, let alone her reading fees. Reading his books might be the only way she could graduate. He understood this situation. He himself had had to borrow to pay for all the research papers he read. 10% of those fees went to the researchers who wrote the papers. Since Dan aimed for an academic career, he could hope that his own research papers, if frequently referenced, would bring in enough to repay this loan. Later on, Dan would learn there was a time when anyone could go to the library and read journal articles and even books without having to pay. There were independent scholars who read thousands of pages without government library grants. But in the 1990s, both commercial and nonprofit journal publishers had begun charging fees for access. By 2047, libraries offering free public access to scholarly literature were a dim memory. There were ways, of course, to get around the SPA and central licensing. They were themselves illegal. Dan had had a classmate in software, Frank Martucci, who had obtained an illicit debugging tool and used it to skip over the copyright monitor code when reading books. But he had told too many friends about it, and one of them turned him into the SPA for a reward. Students deep in debt were easily tempted into betrayal. In 2047, Frank was in prison, not for pirate reading, but for possessing a debugger. Dan would later learn that there was a time when anyone could have debugging tools. There were even free debugging tools available on CD or downloadable over the net. But ordinary users started using them to bypass copyright monitors, and eventually a judge ruled that this had become their principal use in actual practice. This meant they were illegal. The debuggers' developers were sent to prison. Programmers still needed debugging tools, of course, but debugger vendors in 2047 distributed numbered copies only, and only to officially licensed and bonded programmers. The debugger Dan used in software class was kept behind a special firewall so that it could be used only for class exercises. It was also possible to bypass the copyright monitors by installing a modified system kernel. Dan would eventually find out about the free kernels, even entire free operating systems, that had existed around the turn of the century. But not only were they illegal, like debuggers, you could not install one if you had one without knowing your computer's root password. And neither the FBI nor Microsoft support would tell you that. Dan concluded that he couldn't simply lend Lissa his computer, but he couldn't refuse to help her because he loved her. Every chance to speak with her filled him with delight, and that she chose him to ask for help, that could mean she loved him too. Dan resolved the dilemma by doing something even more unthinkable. He lent her the computer and told her his password. This way, if Lissa read his books, central licensing would think he was reading them. It was still a crime, but the SPA would not automatically find out about it. They would only find out if Lissa reported him. Of course, if the school ever found out that he had given Lissa his own password, it would be curtains for both of them as students, regardless of what she had used it for. Lissa did not report Dan to the SPA. His decision to help her led to their marriage, and also led them to question what they had been taught about piracy as children. The couple began reading about the history of copyright, about the Soviet Union and its restrictions on copying, and even the original United States Constitution. They moved to Luna, where they found others who had likewise gravitated away from the long arm of the SPA. When the Tycho Uprising began in 2062, the universal right to read soon became one of its central aims.
Okay, there's a lot of things in that right to read animation that I think are very interesting to consider, right? If you need a computer to read content because that content needs to be monitored, this is borderline, police state. But if you start thinking about today in 2024, just how much of our online content is dependent upon our SaaS providers, whether it's from OpenAI, from Microsoft, from Google, from Slack, from Salesforce, right? Whose data, who do we own this? It's really, really interesting. So now, are we going to go that far that way? You don't know. Because when you look at how illogical, at least in the US and probably nationwide, we are about healthcare, about guns, about violence, about immigration, we seem to have non-scientific yet human responses to these things. So once these AI corporations, which are going to be very powerful, start getting more in the hand of the average person, and we have some issues, whether it's a safety issue, a Tesla, crashing into someone on the sidewalk. It could be any car at this point. It doesn't have to be a Tesla. But my point is once we get that kind of general outcry from the public, there will be some responses from politicians, perhaps at the state level or the federal level, and we might see things like this be enforced. So once again, I really believe that most of the AI regulation that we're talking about is basically either banning them or making them more transparent. But I really do believe that this digital rights management, this control of what the data is that I'm training my AIs on is going to be so important. It might bring back the ways of the old DRMs. Now, if you enjoyed this video on artificial intelligence, we've got a whole AI playlist where we talk about how to audit AIs, how to attack them, why we should fear them. And we've got some of our own original content, some short stories about AIs, people from the future coming back to Earth, to the RSA conference even, and tell us about the future AIs and that kind of thing. If you like this video, give us a like, subscribe to the channel. If you want to see more content like this, connect with me on LinkedIn, drop me a note, give me some suggestions, and I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you have a great week. I'm Ron Gula from Gula Tech Adventures. Have a great week.